Hello my dear church boys and welcome back to yet another episode of St. Robert's Daygame and Dating Podcast. And this week we're going to be talking about the typical daygame trip mistakes. Because if you listen to what guys are telling about their daygame trips, you'll quickly see that there are two types of trips or two types of daygamers in terms of how they do on these daygame trips. You can go to a nice city, enjoy the restaurants that they have there, talk to a bunch of beautiful girls on the street, maybe even get a date with a really nice girl, but in most cases, that's all that happens there. Or you can be one of the guys who goes on a trip after trip and knows how to do that to have very good chances of actually getting laid with the local girls there. After a year or maybe 1.5 years of daygaming in the city where I'm from, Riga, Latvia, I realized that I want to see different cultures, I want to meet different types of women, I want to go to other places, and I didn't just start going on daygame trips, but starting my first ever daygame trip, I actually started living a nomadic lifestyle, and I did it for 5 years. I went to a bunch of locations in different parts of Europe. I visited a bunch of places in North America. I did Mexico, Colombia. I've spent, around maybe 6 months, maybe a little less in Argentina. So I've been places. So I think I know what I'm talking when it comes to daygaming in different locations and understanding how to get good results in each of them. Not only that, but I've been coaching daygame for more than half a decade and also worked with a lot of digital nomads. It's one thing to go to different locations and get laid on your own or by yourself, but it's a completely different thing to understand what kind of limitations other guys have, help them overcome those, and then get other people laid in very different locations. So I'll be cocky enough to say that I know a little bit about daygame travel and the mistakes people make. And today I'll tell you about 11 mistakes you should avoid making or 11 things you should understand if you want to get good results on a daygame trip. Let's leave the boring mistakes that you maybe already know about for a little later and start with something a little bit more interesting. Being pissed about different cultures. Latinas are late. In some places, you're expected to pay for drinks and whatever else you're doing on a date, while in other places, if you do so, it will be considered rude. Guys go to maybe Eastern Europe or Latin America and expect everything to be like in their own country. Your country has its flow of things when it comes to dating, and other places have their own rules. You have to accept them. And this isn't a rare thing. I hear guys complaining about these things all the time. You hear about guys going to pretty much anywhere in Latin America and they complain about women being late. Or they go to maybe Russia or the Baltics or Ukraine before the war, maybe some places in the Balkans, and they're surprised when the women expect them to pay for the drinks, and they're kind of pissed about it. So you can either be pissed about these things and expect everything to be like it is in your country, or you can understand that there are different rules in different places. And once you learn that, once you accept it, you'll be able to adapt your behavior to different locations, different types of girls, and trust me, your results will start improving pretty fast. For example, Colombians are late. Scheduling a date for 6 p.m. doesn't mean that it will start at 6 p.m. It means you'll be chatting with her during the day. You will confirm the date earlier the same day. She will let you know, you'll know when she's getting ready. She'll tell you when she's leaving the place to go to meet you at the date, and the time when she leaves the apartment might already be after 6 p.m. Whereas if you just schedule the date for 6 p.m., you just confirm it earlier the same day, you don't chat with her, maybe you don't even confirm, but you show up at 6, you'll be waiting for quite a bit of time, and she might not even show up and you will be pissed. My advice for Colombia would be don't leave your place before you know she's really left her place. I've had cases where I had waited for quite a bit of time before they show up. So it's a very typical mistake, and don't make it. And when it comes to paying for dates in the places where that is very common, kind of the further east you go in Europe, the more common that's gonna be. You have to kind of distinguish the difference between two different things. One is just paying for the drinks, that's expected, but the other is when you invite her for drinks and you offer, kind of, hey, let's go to this place, and she refuses to go to that bar, and she suggests to go to a very specific cocktail bar or whatever, and doesn't agree to go anywhere else. In that case, it's very likely that you are either being scammed because she will take you to a scam bar where you'll get a very big bill at the end of the date, and there is no way you're getting out of that because that is actually legal. Those drinks that she ordered are somewhere on a menu with ridiculous prices. You just didn't know that, you didn't notice that, so technically the police can't even do anything. Or she's just using you to go to a really expensive fancy bar because you're a foreigner there and you will kind of once in a while, rarely, but it will happen, you will run into girls who do that. But you have to understand that there is a big difference. The first option is you are picking the venues, you're leading and she's following, and then, well, you're paying for the drinks and that's fine. And the second one is just she refuses to go to the bars that you pick and she's taking you to specific venues. That's where you should be careful. But other than that, you are expected to pay for the dates in most cases in these locations. I've daygamed and coached in very many different locations, and daygame is 90% the same in all these places. So if you have good fundamentals, your game will work wherever you go. But the remaining 10% do make a lot of difference. So if you learn to understand what are the remaining 10%, how to adapt your game to each location, that will be massively, massively good for your results. Each time you learn to adapt to a new location, you become better at daygame. You learn to adapt to new locations, new types of girls, faster and faster, and eventually you'll be able to go to a random location no one knows anything about, and after a few days of approaching, you'll know very well what works and what doesn't work there. Or you can keep being pissed for Colombians being late. It's your call. The second mistake is going to the wrong destinations. This is one of the boring mistakes that you maybe know about, so let's keep this short. Most places you've heard about are actually pretty damn decent destinations for a daygame trip, so don't be looking for the ideal place for your next trip. Just find a place that you will enjoy, the types of women that you'll meet there, the vibe, cleanliness and how developed the city is, the level of difficulty, safety, and things like that. It doesn't have to be perfect, just pick something. Just because everyone is going to Warsaw, Budapest, Prague, Medellin doesn't mean that you have to go there too. Actually, I strongly advise against going to 2 of these locations. You want to know why? Well, let's look at 3 places that historically were very popular for daygame trips: Kiev, Prague, and Medellin. Kiev used to be this place where everyone was going on daygame trips, and then they were telling, oh my god, I went on a date with this super hot girl, and then that's generally the case. They went on dates with really, really hot girls, but the part they don't tell you is that most of those guys didn't get laid, because it's extremely easy to get dates even with very hot women in Ukraine, but it's very hard to get laid with them. So can you trust the opinions of everyone who says that Kiev is this amazing city where you get dates with really hot women? Not really. Prague used to be the most popular daygame city in Europe, sort of like Warsaw is right now, and everyone was going there, but it was for a good reason. That place was full of tourists, and a lot of solo Russian travelers, when they were going on their first trip abroad, they were going to Prague. And well, as I used to say, there is nothing easier than a solo Russian traveler. But then COVID started and most of the travel in Europe stopped. And what happened? Everyone was still going to Prague. All the daygamers, I mean. Were there still a lot of solo Russian tourists? No. And then the war started and you had even fewer Russians visiting there. So was it still a great city for daygame? No. Is it a good city for daygame right now? I haven't been there for a few years, but I actually have a feeling that it might be becoming pretty good again, because again, it's not as popular for daygame anymore. Now everyone's traveling again. It's a very popular tourism destination in Europe, one of the most popular ones actually, and it's become much more expensive, so a lot of daygamers simply can't afford to go there anymore. And Medellin is the perfect example because during COVID times, it became this nomad hotspot. Everyone was going there. But it's a very sketchy place, and some of the let's call them some of the worst people, they pretty soon realized there are a lot of gringos trying to sleep with girls there. And well, over the last years, you hear so many cases of guys going on a Tinder date, but boom, they show up and they're beaten to death with a wrench and then robbed, and stories like that keep surfacing all the time. You hear so many cases of guys being drugged, robbed, beaten, killed, or maybe even a girl shows up to their place and only tells you that she's a hooker later, and then you have to send her home. Yet, all of these three places at their peak were the main places where everyone should go, and it was amazing. Medellin still is one of the most popular places for day game trips in Latin America, even though it's ridiculously dangerous right now if you're going there to meet some women. Another thing to think about is if you're looking for something more than just fun, if you're looking for maybe something long-term, if you meet the right person, ask yourself, would you be able to date someone from that part of the world? Although I obviously think that you aren't really able to tell that before you've spent quite a bit of time in that location, but think about it a little bit. For example, Latinas are amazing, but when I was thinking about starting a relationship, I did think about, hey, which parts of the world would I want to date women from? And I've quickly realized that even though Latinas are amazing, there is no way I could date most of them because they just love drama too much. There are many cool destinations all over the world: Europe, Latin America, Asia, and yes, even in North America, you have a bunch of amazing day game cities. So pick a city that's close to you, maybe something that's not top of the list, and just go there. Which brings us to the third mistake: understanding that each place has its bottleneck. This is an interesting concept a lot of people don't understand when they start going on day game trips. Let's say you are living in an average day game city where you have to approach 3 women to get 1 number, you have to get 5 numbers to get 1 first date, and you have to go on 2 first dates to sleep with one of the girls. Those are the average conversion rates. Well, but it does change when you go to different cities. And guys don't really understand this. Take Argentina as an example. Well, there the number close ratio is gonna be similar. You're still gonna get on average one number out of 3 approaches, but most of these numbers will flake. Argentinas are incredibly flaky. They give the number, but they never respond, or they disappear. They don't come out on dates. But when they come out on dates, it's really up to you to fuck it up to not get laid, because it's very easy, if you know what you're doing, to convert dates to lays. So the bottleneck in Argentina is converting the number to date. Now let's take, I spent 3 months in Kharkiv, Ukraine before the war. Let's take that as an example. Open to number close ratio is pretty similar. I would say that number to date ratio is better than in other places. It was very easy to get dates there. But I think I went on 8 first dates to nowhere before I can understand what works in Ukraine and started getting laid, because the bottleneck there was converting dates to lays. You had to learn to understand with which girls it's kind of worth going for one more drink, maybe worth going on a second or even on the third date, and with which ones you just have to cut the losses and kind of leave after the first drink or never see them after the first date. If you're interested in the stories about how we cracked Ukraine, because I went to 8 first dates to nowhere, and then everything exploded and everything started working once we figured out what to do. I've done actually 2 podcast episodes about that. Just search Ukraine on my YouTube channel and you'll find it. So it's important to understand this idea of bottleneck, that just because you aren't converting your numbers to dates, it doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. Maybe the typical average ratios for that city, they're just different. So sometimes guys get really, really demoralized, or they get super happy, like the example with Kia, where they get a lot of dates, but they aren't getting laid. So you kind of have to take these things into account, maybe research this a little bit if you're kind of part of a good day game group where you have a lot of good day gamers who can give you you input about this. And if you're not, you can always join our private community and you'll find all the details about that by clicking the link in the description. And the next mistake is going too deep on your first trip. Don't go to Colombia if this is your first day game trip outside of the developed world. Go to a place that's, safer. I think Mexico is a great example for this. Find out what day game in Latin America is like, understand how to behave so that you'd be less likely to get robbed, understand whether you like day gaming, Latinas and whether you like hanging out with them, and well, if you do, learn the Spanish for your next trips. And the next mistake is taking short trips. If you're going on a week-long day game trip, you aren't actually going on a day game trip, you're going on a trip where you also will be day gaming, and if you get any real results during this trip, it's basically because you just got lucky. Depending on your skill level and where you're going, it will take you between 30 and 100 or even more if you're a complete beginner approaches to get laid. So understand that, and you'll have to maybe go on one date, maybe on multiple dates, and it's very hard to do that within 1 week without having luck involved. It's better to go on fewer but longer trips, or go to a place where you are going back regularly that's very close to you so you can follow up with your leads, day game some more, go on some dates, etc., like many places in Central Europe. And the next mistake that very many guys make when they go on day game trips is hanging out with bad day gamers, except locals. When you go somewhere else, you are solo, so it's kind of cool to meet some other day gamers, hang out with them, day game together, maybe go for some beers, food, etc. But if you go out with someone and you see that they take 40 minutes between approaches and they do like 3 approaches in a 2-hour session and they're not getting results, and historically they don't have any day game results, you are better off day gaming on your own. You are the average of the 5 day gamers you spend the most time with. And if you spend time with guys that are not getting any results, well, guess what you'll learn? Shitty habits, you'll get used to being just like them, and you also will be one of the guys not getting any results. But the exception is going out with the local day gamers. If you meet local day gamers who are willing to show you around, especially places that maybe foreign day gamers don't know, then well, take them up on their offer, spend some time with them, have them show you around, maybe buy them a beer, as a thank you. Because in many places you have these main streets where all the foreign day gamers go, but there are better locations in all of these cities where there are no other day gamers. And the local guys, they know about these places. So even if you meet some local guys who aren't getting great results, aren't great day gamers, it's still very likely that they know these locations. So it's still pretty cool to hang out with them. Next mistake, bad logistics. Make sure that your place is no more than 15 minutes away from the place where you'll be day gaming and where all the bars are. If you can afford it, get a place in a perfect location. If you can't, a little bit further away is okay too, because you can always take a short taxi ride for a pool, but it does make it a little bit harder. Pooling with bad logistics gets exponentially harder, especially for same delays. If you're on a budget in Europe, you can actually get great places, maybe 20-minute walk away from the main area, where all the tourists are and where the main day game streets are. And actually these neighborhoods are very often popular for the younger crowds, for the hipsters. They have a lot of cool bars, with craft beer and maybe some good cocktails, bars and things like that. So it's always an option in Europe. But you should never do this in Latin America. Never try to save money in Latin America by getting accommodations slightly further away from the main places that are safe, because in most places, not most, but in many places in Latin America, you can go from fairly safe to pretty dangerous neighborhood by just crossing the street. So when it comes to Latin America, always stay in the places that you have confirmed are relatively safe and popular and where you can walk around on the street, at least during the day. The night is, well, it's sketchy pretty much everywhere. Next, believing you're higher value just because you are a foreigner in a cheap country. Well, it's so sad to disappoint you, but hot girls have plenty of options in any place you're going to. Both foreigners and local guys are throwing money at them. This includes all the locations in Eastern Europe and most places in Latin America. That being said, you are actually higher value and you will get more dates if you are going after the average girl that hasn't been approached by a lot of foreigners. Here, knowing the language plays a big part if you're going out in Latin America. But still, the hottest women in these locations have been out with foreigners or have been approached by a bunch of foreigners one way or the other, and they have pretty high value local dudes pursuing them as well. So, well, I'm sorry, but you're not gonna have a big advantage just because you are a foreigner. But again, there's nothing wrong with going after a girl that isn't all dolled up walking down the street. You can actually, what I do is look at her and think, how would she look naked? And you will start to see that, well, at least a lot of guys are seeing it like that. A lot of guys are going after girls who are very dolled up, very princessy, all kind of dressed up with a lot of makeup and things like that. But if you imagine them naked, oftentimes they're not the hottest ones. So maybe experiment with thinking about, how would she look naked? And you'll see that a lot of women that you want to approach aren't the hottest ones, and some that you wouldn't even notice are actually way more beautiful. And you also have to take into account that because you are a high-value foreigner, in some places you will become a mark. In Colombia, that will be for robbing you. In a pre-war Kiev, that would be taking you to a scam bar. And in some places in Russia, that would be simply to get stuff from you. Expensive dinners, expensive cocktail bars, gifts, and things like that. Next, and this might be counterintuitive, lying about how long you're in a city for. If you're in a place for a week, but you tell all the girls that you're there for maybe a few months, or maybe you're considering living there, what's going to happen when you ask them out? They will know that, oh, this guy's here for a while. Maybe he's going to be living here. So you will have some girls who would never sleep with you fast, maybe who would sleep with you after maybe 2, 3, or even more dates. You would have a lot of girls like that who go out on dates with you, and well, we can all understand that a lot of these dates wouldn't end in a too interesting way, to use like a nicer phrasing. Whereas if you are honest and you tell them that you're there for, let's say, just a week, then, well, they already know you're not staying for a longer time. So the girls that come out with you, it doesn't mean they're coming out and they're ready to sleep with you, but it's just the likelihood is higher because you filtered out for the girls that definitely wouldn't go out with someone who's there just for a week. And mistake number 10 is not speaking the language, or maybe speaking the language. I sometimes hear guys who are thinking about going to trips to more Eastern-ish Europe, maybe the Baltics, maybe even Poland, because you have many Ukrainians living there right now. They're considering learning Russian because they hear that, they have a lot of Russian speakers there, so Russian will be very, very helpful. And it's a waste of time because you're learning a language for a location where most people speak English. Actually, if you're going to the places like the Baltics or places where you have a lot of Ukrainians living, and speaking Russian there might actually be insulting for people who don't come from Russian families, and you could get some backlash for that. In these places, the educated people will speak pretty good English, and the only people with very limited English will be maybe Ukrainians who have recently moved and then they've learned the language. Let's say in Poland, you have a lot of Ukrainians who have learned Polish, but they're still working on their English. But actually, they're working on it very, very fast because to work good jobs, they need to learn English as well. So in these places, you're just wasting your time if you're trying to learn the language. But if you know you're going to be going back to some certain part of the world where a lot of people speak the language and where a lot of people don't speak English, then it's a great idea to learn that language once you've been there for the first time and once you've confirmed that you like that part of the world and you want to be going back there. Some examples of these places could be, well, obviously Latin America. And for people who go to Russia, well, obviously learning some Russian if you've been there and you know you're going to be going back is also a good idea. In Latin America, speaking Spanish opens a lot of doors, and what's very important, a lot of guys who go there for day game, they don't speak Spanish, so they're talking to girls in English, and well, the girls who speak English, and well, the hot girls who speak English, they've talked to foreigners, they've probably been on dates with foreigners, but the beautiful, amazing local girls who don't speak any English, the likelihood that they've talked to a lot of foreigners and been on dates with foreigners is just simply much slower because most foreigners do not speak the language. And if you do, then well, you can go out with all these amazing women who just don't speak a single word of English. The last mistake is not knowing how to day game in places with low levels of English. I asked two guys about level of English in Rio in Brazil, and one of them said that 90% of the girls aren't able to have a conversation in English, only like 10% are able to have like a nice chat. And this guy wasn't a day gamer, he wasn't experienced day gaming in places with low levels of English. And then there was another guy who was a fairly good day gamer who said, oh dude, yeah, you can run sets in English with around 50% of the women you'll meet on the streets. So who is right? Well, the difference is the better day gamer knew how to talk to girls with pretty bad English. And the way you do that is actually pretty simple. You speak slower with fewer words and with simpler words. So basically, you want to really simplify your English. Imagine you're talking to a kid who's learning English. This is kind of hard to do for someone who's a native English speaker, but if English is your second language, then well, just imagine you're speaking to someone who's learning the language in your country, but they're just started learning, it isn't that great, and you'll quickly realize that you can speak with so many more girls than you thought. If you take into account these 11 mistakes that I've seen many guys, both regular day gamers and the guys I coach, and even me, I've made a lot of these mistakes when I was starting to travel. If you take them into account, then obviously your chances of getting better results on a day game trip go up massively. And if you have any questions about anything that we talked about here, or you want to discuss anything else about day game trips, then you can do that in our private community. You can find out all the details about it by clicking the link in the description. And if you want to go on a day game trip with me, then well, consider getting day game coaching. I have a few spots left available this summer in Europe. And then in kind of October, November, I am going to Argentina, where I have a few coaching spots already booked. And then I most likely will be going to Rio, Brazil, where it's a place that's been on my list for quite some time. And if I go there, I'll have 2 coaching spots available there as well. So if you want to join me in any of these trips, then you'll find a link in the description where you can find all the details about how coaching usually works, approximate pricing, etc. And there you can also sign up for a free call where we will kind of get to know each other, because I have to know a few things about you, because I don't do any group coaching or anything like that, and everyone needs a kind of different approach. If you're a serious IT guy, then you need one approach, whereas if you're in sales and kind of working with people all the time, then well, that kind of means you need a bit of a different approach about coaching. So we'll get to know each other. We talk about how coaching usually works, and so you can understand whether this is a good idea for you. Well guys, that's it. See you in the next podcast episode. Ciao guys.